The name Gaia originally is the Greek goddess of the earth, and that name was then borrowed in the late 60s, early 70s by a man named Dr. James Lovelock, who developed a Gaia theory. And the Gaia theory is that the earth is sort of a superorganism, that it meets a lot of the requirements of being a living organism like we do. It regulates its temperature. The temperature remains somewhat constant. The balance of the elements in the air, that it moves, that it changes. And so I have been reading about that and had the great thought that I think spurs a lot of writing, which is what if. And I said, what if there was a kid that could talk to the planet? You know, and what would the planet say back to the kid? And it kind of started a chain of ideas, and I went from there.
Now, Gaia Girls Enter the Earth is about 4 girls.
Well, actually, it's the first in a series, and in the series there will be 4 girls. This is about the first girl, and the first girl is what I call the Earth Girl. In the next book, which will be called Way of Water, it's about the Water Girl. She'll have different water powers. And so the first girl is she lives on a farm in upstate New York, and it's a small family farm, and it's being threatened by an incoming factory farm operation. And she meets Gaia, and I might say that this cute little otter you see standing behind us is Gaia. So if the Earth was going to, if the Earth is going to talk to somebody, what form is it going to take? And when I had that thought, the instant image I got was this little otter going like this, and it was just so strong I had to use it. And basically, Gaia asks her to help and gives her these great powers, and she has to figure out how to save her farm, and really her whole sort of way of life in this wonderful idyllic valley from this incoming factory hog farm. And if you've ever even driven past a small hog farm, you know what that smells like. So it's a neat story, and it does introduce people to a very real environmental issue.
Is that what you were hoping kids would learn, was about environmental issues through these books?
A little bit. I call it fiction with a mission. There's sort of 2 things that happen. One, I find the grown-ups that read it come back to me and say, is this for real? Does this really go on? And most of us don't think that much about where our meat comes from. And I have had people that grown-ups generally, that have read the book, that have really thought more about where they're buying their meat, have started going to, local, more sustainable farmers whose cows are actually out grazing in the pasture and getting their meat that way. And for kids, I think what they get out of it is that there is value to going out into nature and paying attention to it and listening to it. Now, I don't expect your typical 9-year-old to become an advocate for sustainably grown meat, but I also know that books that really grab you with the entertainment of the story will stay with you. And I'm a lifelong reader, and I've always loved the Narnia books, the Little House on the Prairie books, etc. And when you grow up, you will remember those things. So my hope is that, down the road, when the kids that read this book are making their own consumer choices, they will remember some of the things. And the nice thing I've heard back from people is it doesn't beat you over the head with the environmental issue. It's a ripping good tale, and you get caught up in the story. And then it's really in the back of the book, it says, if you want to know more about this issue, here's a website, here's some more resources.
That's a question I was going to ask you. Do you think that it might scare kids into the environmental issue, or scare them about a society that they didn't really understand was going on?
I have yet to have anyone give me that feedback. What I get is I get emails from kids. I get little presents sent to my house that say, I love Gaia. Kids, I think, naturally love nature, so they fall very easily into the story. And I think that they sort of, maybe the overall message that kids get very easily is that there are people who would wantonly destroy nature just to make a buck. And it is presented more that way. It's not too scary. There's actually a website called The Matrix, which is a spoof on The Matrix, and it's like this 5-minute cartoon, and kids love it. And it's much, in a way, much scarier than my book, but the kids really do enjoy it. So,
how did you get started in thinking up this idea?
Well, it did start with that what-if moment. What if the planet was going to talk to somebody? What if a kid could talk to the planet? I told my husband about the idea, and he teaches 3rd grade, and he hounded me for a year. The joke in my house is I say, I owe all my success to this one thing. My husband's finger going, you got to write that book. And he bugged me for a year. He says, kids are going to love the story, and he says, we need more girl heroes. Is another thing. And I thought about it, and I finally wanted to get him off my back, so I started writing it. And I originally was going to put all 4 girls into one story, and got very bogged down that way. So I decided to start with what you know. I grew up on a family farm in this area, so that was, in a sense, easy for me to write, easy for me to describe. And so I started with that and thought, let me get going on it. And eventually I literally went away for a week and rented a cabin in the woods, very Thoreau style, and had no distractions, which was the beauty of it. And I could sit and write for hours and kind of get lost in the story that I was seeing and just write it. And then came all the editing.
Is that the hardest part?
The hardest part is editing, and then also the rewriting. And I forgot who said it, but they said you have to be able to kill your darling. Sometimes there's these great little things that you write and you like it, but it doesn't really work in the story, so you have to be willing to cut it out and delete it and move it or change it. And then I got feedback. I printed out first drafts, probably 15 to 20 of them, and gave them to trusted friends, some relatives, people I knew that loved to read, loved a good story, and asked for feedback. And I got some wonderful feedback, and I did make some substantial changes based on that. So that's a very valuable tool to, once you've got your first draft done, to then send it out into the world with trusted people and let them come back with some constructive criticism. I ignored some of it, too, because I just said, well, I don't agree.
Okay. Why did you choose factory farming?
I struggle a little bit about what issue I wanted to work with, and I really don't remember where I first came across that issue, but then I picked up a book called The Meat You Eat, and it's all about all kinds of meat farming, including eggs and chickens and dairy and hogs, and I have to say I've changed my meat buying habits. And then I also read, so that got me interested. I went on to read another book called Diet for a Dead Planet, and really got more familiar with sort of industrial agriculture and what's changed in the last 20 years about how we get food. And it just, I think what disturbed me the most is I felt like this method of farming, in a way, steals the childhood away from a lot of kids. In North Carolina, and even here in New York, there are streams you can't let your kids play in because they're contaminated from all the runoff. And there are wells. People with well water now can't use their own well water. There are families that can no longer have picnics in their backyard because of the flies and the smell, and there's nitrates, and the ammonia in the air. And I just thought, this is all this just so the meat can be 50 cents cheaper or $1 cheaper. And since I grew up playing in the creek, you could hardly get me out of it in the summertime. It touched me, and I thought I want to bring this into light. I was surprised I didn't know about it, and so I thought the entertainment of a story is a good way to sort of bring it out into the broader public.
And why did you want to share that message with kids?
Because people spend so much time and money getting kids to buy things. Marketing to children is huge, and yet nobody really tells them that their dollars have power. And this message really isn't in the book, like, hey, kids, your dollars have power. But what I hope is that it opens up a discussion. And when I'm going into schools, I'm talking about this, that, hey, kids, maybe you can't travel through trees, but you have Gaia power, and it's how you spend your money. That your money, when you put $1 across a counter, you're saying yes to something. And I think, again, your typical 9-year-old may not change their buying habits today, but just understanding that idea that your money says yes to something, it'll stick with them, and it's worth putting that little seed back there, And I'm sure all of us remember books that we read when we were little kids or teenagers that our teachers made us, and you don't remember the story in general, but there is a message that always seems to stick with you. Is that what you were hoping for? Yeah, and also in this book there's a reoccurring theme of be brave. It's a phrase that gets repeated where she's very unsure about herself. She gets these cool powers, she makes some mistakes, and then she's really unsure. Maybe I don't want to do this at all. And I think those are the things, those are classic hero journeys, and we all have those moments in our life where we're attempting something new, maybe we fail, and then it's, well, do I go on and keep attempting this, or do I back up into a safer place? Do I let circumstances sweep me downstream, as it were, or do I fight it? Do I try to do something daring to change the course of where things are going? And so there's a lot of that in the book, and I think that's what resonates with all readers. I've had people up to age 89 read this book and love it. Now, some of the older readers come back and say, oh, it reminds me of when my father used to take me to the hardware store. It resurrects good memories for them. But I think the hero's journey is something that always resonates with readers, and you recognize it in a lot of good stories.
Okay. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break, but we will be back in just a moment.